The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the ruined city. Dust hung in the air, swirling like ghosts of a time long gone. The buildings were once grand, filled with laughter and music, but now they were broken and abandoned, their stones cracked and crumbling. The streets once paved with care were now littered with debris and the signs of decay. Among the wreckage, a small figure moved quickly, her eyes darting from one pile of rubble to the next. She was quick, agile, moving like a shadow in the dusk. Her face, though covered in dirt and dust, held a quiet determination. She was a girl, no older than 12, though her eyes carried the weight of a much older soul. Her clothes were torn, the fabric barely holding together as she rummaged through the discarded piles of food and scrap metal, looking for anything that could be useful. Her hands trembled as she picked through the trash, her stomach growling with hunger. Her name was Lyra, though she had long forgotten the meaning of it. The people of the city no longer remembered her either. She wasn't someone important to them. She wasn't someone who mattered. To the world, she was just another child abandoned by the fate of her people. Her royal blood, once something to be proud of, had been reduced to nothing more than a distant memory, buried under layers of dirt and shame. Lyra's stomach growled again, louder this time. She grabbed a moldy piece of bread from the ground, brushing it off before she took a bite. It tasted awful, but it was food. For weeks she had survived like this, eating scraps, hiding from those who had no use for her, and drifting through the ruins of a world that had forgotten her. She didn't know what had happened to her family, but she could never forget the palace she had once called home. She would close her eyes and remember the soft silk of her bed, the laughter of her mother, and the warm embrace of her father. But those memories were fading, slipping away as time passed. The girl's eyes closed for a moment as the wind picked up, swirling the dust around her. She could almost hear the sounds of her childhood, her mother's voice calling her to come inside before it grew dark, her father's stern but loving tone as he told her to always be strong. But those memories were fading, and the pain of them was growing. Lyra didn't know who she was anymore. She didn't remember what it was like to be a princess. She didn't know what it was like to have a family. She only knew hunger, loneliness, and the overwhelming sense that she was nothing. As she knelt in the dirt picking at the scraps around her, a strange sound reached her ears, the soft hum of a ship. She looked up, her heart racing as she scanned the horizon. The ship was coming down fast, its shape dark against the orange sky. It wasn't a common sight on this forsaken planet. Ships never came here, not anymore. The ship was large, its engines roaring as it struggled to stay in the air. It looked old, like it had been through a lot. The engine sputtered, and for a moment Lyra thought it might crash. But then, with a final burst of power, the ship leveled off and began to descend more slowly. Lyra stood up quickly, dusting herself off as she turned to watch the ship. Her heart was beating faster now, but not from fear. She felt something else, a strange sense of hope, something she hadn't felt in years. The ship landed with a soft thud on the broken ground not far from her. It was a strange sight, this ship, coming to a planet that had been forgotten by the universe. For a moment, everything was still, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Lyra watched the ship closely, her curiosity outweighing any fear she might have felt. The hatch of the ship opened and a figure stepped out. The first thing Lyra noticed was the uniform. It was different from the clothes she had seen on the few travelers who had passed through the city in the past. This person was human. He wore a dark suit and his movements were confident as he stepped out of the ship. He looked like he had been through a lot, his face covered in a layer of dust and exhaustion. Lyra stepped back instinctively, hiding behind a broken pillar. She wasn't sure what this person wanted. Was he a soldier, a traveler, someone sent by the people who had overthrown her family? She didn't know, but she couldn't let herself be seen. The man looked around, scanning the area with sharp eyes. He seemed confused, his gaze searching for something. After a moment, he saw her. Lyra froze, her heart pounding in her chest. He was staring directly at her, as if he had seen her, as if he knew she was there. She swallowed hard, but instead, Of retreating into the shadows, she stayed where she was, her curiosity getting the better of her. "Hey," the man called, his voice rough but not unfriendly. "Are you all right?" Lyra didn't answer. She couldn't. The words caught in her throat as they always did when someone tried to talk to her. She wasn't sure how to respond to this stranger. She wasn't sure if she even wanted to. The man stepped closer, his boots crunching the dry earth beneath him. "You don't look all right. What are you doing out here?" Lyra glanced at him briefly before looking away, unsure of what to do. She felt a strange sensation, like she was being seen for the first time in years. For so long she had been invisible, hidden away in the shadows. But this man, this stranger, was looking at her like he could see something in her that no one else had. He crouched down a few feet away from her, his eyes softening as he looked at her. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said gently. "I'm just trying to find my way. My ship crashed." He gave a small, tired laugh. "Looks like I'm stuck here." Lyra didn't respond, but she couldn't stop herself from looking at him. There was something about his voice, something that made her feel safe. But she couldn't trust him. She couldn't trust anyone. The man seemed to sense her hesitation. "You don't have to talk," he said, his voice kind. "I just don't want you to be alone out here." Lyra felt the weight of his words, something inside her stirring. She had spent so long alone. She had forgotten what it felt like to have someone care. "I'm Marcus," the man said after a long silence. "What's your name?" Lyra hesitated, her eyes darting to the ground. Her name. It felt foreign to her now. "Lyra," she whispered, barely audible. Marcus smiled, a warm and genuine smile. "Lyra," he repeated, as if savoring the sound of it. "I'm glad to meet you." Lyra didn't know why, but she felt a small flicker of hope. Maybe she wasn't invisible after all. Maybe someone, somewhere, still saw her. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't lost. The days that followed Marcus's crash landing were quiet. It was strange how time could stretch so thin in a place like this. Lyra had grown used to the silence, to the emptiness that filled the air. The city, once teeming with life, was now a ghost of its former self. But since Marcus arrived, the silence didn't feel so oppressive. In fact, she found herself watching for his visits each day. She didn't know why. He was a stranger, a human, from another world. But there was something in the way he looked at her, as if he didn't see the dirt, the rags, or the scavenger that others had turned her into. Marcus had a way of speaking, a kindness in his voice that made her feel less alone. He didn't ask too many questions, didn't push her to speak when she wasn't ready. He just was there, like a steady presence in a world that had forgotten her. It was an odd comfort, one she hadn't felt in a long time. Every day, he brought food. Sometimes it was a bit of bread or dried fruit from his emergency supplies. Other times he managed to find something better: water, fresh fruit, even a piece of jerky. He didn't speak much about where he came from, but Lyra didn't mind. She wasn't sure she wanted to know. His kindness was enough for her right now. At first she was wary. She didn't trust easily, especially not after everything she had been through. The world had taught her that. But slowly the walls she had built around herself began to crumble, brick by brick. She found herself looking forward to his visits, even though she was still unsure of who he was or why he had come. Evening. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft orange glow over the ruins, Marcus sat beside her on a crumbled wall. She hadn't said a word, but she was used to his quiet presence. He was eating a piece of fruit, and she watched him carefully. It had been days since she'd had anything fresh. "Want some?" Marcus asked, offering the fruit. Lyra hesitated. She wasn't used to accepting gifts, especially from strangers. But the fruit looked sweet, and her stomach growled louder than she'd expected. She nodded slightly, just enough for him to notice. Marcus smiled, handing her the fruit. "I promise it's safe." She took it from him, the sweetness bursting on her tongue. It was more than just food. It was a reminder of something better. She hadn't realized how long it had been since she tasted something that wasn't stale or rotten. She ate quietly, her eyes drifting to the broken buildings around them. "Where did you come from?" Lyra's voice was small, but it carried more curiosity than she intended. Marcus took a deep breath, looking up at the sky. It was strange, the way the stars seemed so bright in this desolate place, as if the world had forgotten to hide them behind clouds. "I'm from Earth," he said slowly. "A place far from here. My ship, it wasn't supposed to crash, but it did. And now I'm stuck here, but it's not all bad." He glanced at her with a half smile. "I've met you." Lyra didn't respond right away. Earth. She had heard of it, but it seemed so far away, like something out of a fairy tale. She wondered if the people there were like him. Kind, with a way of making the world feel a little less lonely. But she didn't ask. Instead, The ruins of the city stretched out before Lyra and Marcus, silent and haunting in the early morning light. They had been walking for hours, their footsteps echoing in the empty streets. Lyra led the way, her steps light and swift, her eyes constantly scanning the crumbling buildings and shattered windows. Marcus walked behind her, his gaze more cautious. He was still learning to navigate this strange, desolate place. But Lyra had spent her whole life here. She knew the city like the back of her hand. They reached the heart of the city as the sun climbed higher in the sky. The temperature was rising and the air felt heavy, thick with the dust of 1,000 years. It was here, in the center of the ruins, that the memories of the old world were the most powerful. Lyra could almost hear the whispers of her past, faint echoes of a time when the streets were alive with people, and the buildings were bright and beautiful. But those days were long gone. The palace, once the pride of the city, was now nothing more than a broken shell. It stood like a ghost among the rubble, its once grand spires now jagged and ruined. Lyra stopped at the edge of the courtyard, her eyes fixed on the palace. She had been here once long ago when everything was different, back when she was the princess. Her breath caught in her throat as the memories surged forward unbidden. She remembered her father, standing tall and proud at the gates of the palace, his voice commanding yet kind. She remembered her mother's soft laughter, the warmth of her embrace. The palace had been a place of love, a place of hope. But that was before the coup, before everything had been torn apart. "I never imagined I'd come back here," Lyra said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus stepped closer, his eyes gentle. "You don't have to go in if you're not ready." But Lyra shook her head. She had come this far, and she needed to see it. She needed to face the past to understand what had happened. "I'm ready," she said, more to herself than to Marcus. "We have to keep going." They walked toward the palace, and as they neared the entrance, Lyra hesitated. The doors were wide open, a gaping wound in the side of the building. She could feel the weight of the past pressing down on her, threatening to crush her. But she couldn't turn back now. With a deep breath, she stepped over the threshold. The inside of the palace was even more ruined than the outside. The grand halls were filled with dust, the marble floors cracked and stained. The once beautiful tapestries had long since decayed, leaving only tattered remnants hanging from the walls. The air was thick with the smell of mildew and old stone. It was as if the very heart of the palace had died along with her family. Lyra walked slowly through the halls, her fingers brushing against the walls as she passed. She felt a strange sense of grief, as if the building itself was mourning the loss of everything it had once been. She could almost hear the sounds of the past, the laughter of her people, the music, the voices of her parents. But all of it was gone now, swallowed by time and betrayal. Marcus followed behind her, his eyes scanning the room. He could see the sadness in Lyra's eyes, and he understood. He didn't need to ask what she was feeling. He knew she was grieving for something she had lost, something she could never get back. They made their way deeper into the palace, eventually reaching the grand hall. This was where the royal court had once met, where important decisions were made, where the rulers of the planet had sat in judgment over their people. But now, the hall was empty. The throne at the far end of the room was overturned, the once gilded chair now broken and tarnished. Lyra approached the throne, her heart heavy with memories. She stood before it, her eyes fixed on the empty seat. This was where her father had once sat. This was where she had been meant to sit. But that was before the coup. Before the rebellion that had stolen everything from her. She reached out, her fingers brushing the cold, cracked surface of the throne. For a moment she felt as though she might collapse. The weight of the past, the loss, the betrayal, it all came crashing down on her at once. But then, something shifted. A flicker of memory, a glimpse of the past. She remembered her father's voice, clear and strong, telling her to be brave. She remembered her mother's smile, warm and reassuring, telling her to never give up. Lyra straightened, wiping away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. She wasn't going to let this place break her. She couldn't. Not now, not when she was so close to understanding the truth. As if in answer to her thoughts, she turned to Marcus, who had been standing silently by the doorway. His expression was soft, his gaze never leaving her. "I'm sorry you had to see this," Lyra said, her voice shaking slightly. "It's all so broken." Marcus walked toward her, his steps steady and reassuring. "It's not broken, Lyra. It's just changed. You can rebuild it. You can rebuild everything." Lyra looked up at him, her heart heavy with doubt. How? How can I rebuild something that's been destroyed? My people are gone. My family is gone. I have nothing left. Marcus's voice was firm, but kind. "You're not nothing. You're not alone. You have yourself. And you have me." Lyra felt something stir inside her. For the first time in so long, she felt a small spark of hope. Marcus was right. She wasn't alone. She still had the power to change things, to make a difference. She looked back at the throne, her mind racing with possibilities. Maybe she could rebuild. Maybe she could restore her people to their former glory, but she couldn't do it alone. She needed help. She needed allies. Just then, something caught her eye. A small, glimmering object on the floor near the base of the throne. It was a tiny piece of metal, shiny and smooth. She bent down to pick it up, and as she did, a rush of memories flooded her mind. Images of her father's advisors, of the royal council, of the day the coup had begun. The memories were sharp and painful, but they were also clear. She remembered the faces of the traitors who had turned against her family, the ones who had overthrown her father. And then, she saw something else, something that made her heart stop. The piece of metal in her hand was a key to a hidden room in the palace, a room that had been sealed off for years. She had seen it before, in her father's study. It was a room that held the secrets of the royal family, a place where important documents and treasures had been hidden. Lyra's hands trembled as she held the key. This was it. The answers she had been searching for were here, hidden in this room. But there was one problem. She wasn't the only one who knew about it. The traitors who had overthrown her family had likely been searching for the same thing, and they would stop at nothing to get it. She looked up at Marcus, her eyes filled with determination. "We have to go. There's something in this palace that I need to find." Marcus nodded without hesitation. "I'm with you, let's go." With the key in her hand, Lyra turned toward the corridor that led to the hidden room. She didn't know what she would find inside, but she knew it was important. It was the key to understanding what had happened to her family, and it might just be the key to her future. The air felt heavy as Lyra and Marcus made their way through the winding corridors of the palace. The key she held in her hand seemed to pulse with an energy all its own, as if it was alive with the secrets it held. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of fear and anticipation. She had never ventured this deep into the palace before, not even when her family had ruled. The deeper they went, the more she felt like she was uncovering pieces of her forgotten past, pieces that had been locked away for far too long. The palace had once been a place of grandeur. Now it was a tomb, silent, broken, and abandoned. But for Lyra, it was a place of hope. Every step they took brought her closer to the answers she had been searching for. She could almost hear the echoes of her father's voice in the distance, as if he were urging her on. "You are stronger than you think," he had always told her. "Never forget who you are." Marcus walked beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. He didn't speak much, but she could tell that he understood the weight of this moment. He had never known her before the fall of the royal family. He didn't know the pain she carried, the burden of a legacy lost. But in that silence, he had become her support, her anchor, and for the first time, Lyra didn't feel completely alone. They reached a large, ornate door at the end of the hall. The key in Lyra's hand seemed to fit perfectly into the lock, and with a soft click, the door creaked open. Inside was a room bathed in a soft, golden light. Dust hung in the air, undisturbed by time, as if the room had been sealed for centuries. On the far side of the room, against the wall, stood a large wooden chest. Lyra's breath caught in her throat. This was it. The room she had heard whispers of as a child. The room that held the secrets of her family's rule. The truth about what had happened to her parents. Her hand trembled as she walked toward the chest. She could feel Marcus's eyes on her, but she didn't look back. She couldn't. This was something she had to do on her own. The chest was old, its surface covered in intricate carvings that seemed to tell a story. Stories of kings and queens, of battles fought and won, of a kingdom that had once stood tall among the stars. Lyra ran her fingers over the carvings, feeling a strange connection to them. It was like they were calling her, urging her to open the chest and discover the truth. With a deep breath, she lifted the lid. Inside, the chest was filled with old scrolls, faded maps, and artifacts. At the very top was a small, ornate. The days had passed in a whirlwind of action. Lyra and Marcus had gathered allies from across the planet, forming a resistance that had begun to take shape, though the road ahead still seemed long and uncertain. Lyra was no longer just a girl, lost in the ruins of a crumbled palace. She was a leader, and with each passing day, she grew into the role more and more. But the true test was ahead. The battle for her throne, the struggle to restore the kingdom that had once been hers. Lyra stood at the edge of a cliff, looking down at the valley below. The resistance was ready. They had gathered their forces, recruited soldiers, and found old allies who had been hiding in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to rise. But Lyra knew that the hardest part was still to come. The forces of the new regime, the ones who had overthrown her family, were powerful and ruthless. The battle would not be easy. Marcus stood beside her, his eyes scanning the horizon. His expression was unreadable, but there was a quiet strength in the way he carried himself. He had become more than just a companion to Lyra. He was her closest ally, the one person who had stood by her through everything. She knew that whatever happened, he would be there, helping her every step of the way. "You ready?" he asked, his voice steady, though there was a hint of concern in his eyes. Lyra turned to him, her gaze firm and determined. "I have to be." The plan was simple. The resistance would launch a surprise attack on the capital city, where the new rulers had set up their base of operations. The element of surprise was their greatest weapon, but it also meant they had to act quickly and decisively. There would be no second chances. "I've been ready for this for a long time," Lyra said quietly. "I know what's at stake. I can't let our people suffer any longer." Marcus nodded, his expression softening. "You're not alone, Lyra. We'll fight together. We'll win together." Lyra gave him a small, grateful smile. The weight of what they were about to do was heavy on her shoulders, but hearing his words made her feel a little less burdened. For the first time in a long while, she felt like she wasn't carrying the weight of the world alone. The night before the battle, Lyra couldn't sleep. She lay awake in her tent, staring at the ceiling, her mind racing with thoughts of what was to come. It was a battle for everything, her family, her people, her future. But the stakes felt even higher than that. It was about proving to herself that she was worthy of the throne, worthy of leading the kingdom. She had to win, not just for her people, but for the memory of her parents, for the legacy of the royal family. She had been through so much already. The pain of losing everything, the loneliness of exile, the doubt that had gnawed at her for years. But now she had a chance to change all of that. She had a chance to rebuild her kingdom, to restore the honor and pride that had been lost when her family had fallen. A soft knock at the tent flap interrupted her thoughts. Lyra looked up to see Marcus standing there, his silhouette framed by the light of the campfire outside. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. Lyra nodded, motioning for him to enter. "Of course." Marcus stepped inside and sat down across from her, his expression serious but kind. "I know you're anxious. I would be too. This battle, it means everything. But I just want to remind you of something." He paused, as if choosing his words carefully. "You're not just fighting for the throne. You're fighting for your people. You're fighting for hope. You've already done more than most would ever do in a lifetime. Whatever happens tomorrow, you've already shown them that you're a leader." Lyra felt a lump rise in her throat at his words. She had always doubted herself, always wondered if she was truly capable of leading. But hearing Marcus say it so simply, so matter-of-factly, made her believe it for the first time. Maybe she was ready, maybe she was capable of this. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Marcus smiled softly. "No need to thank me. I've seen what you can do. I know you'll win." The next day, the sky was gray, and the air was thick with tension. Lyra stood at the front of the resistance army, looking out at the soldiers who had gathered for the battle. Their faces were grim, but there was a fire in their eyes, determination, hope, and a belief in the cause that had brought them here. "We've fought for this moment," Lyra said, her voice carrying over the crowd. "We've lost so much, but we haven't lost hope. We are the heart of this kingdom, and we will fight to take it back. For our families, for our future, and for the memory of those who came before us. Together, we will reclaim what is ours." The crowd erupted into cheers, the sound of their voices ringing through the valley. Lyra felt a surge of emotion rise within her. These were the people she had fought for, the people she had promised to lead. And now, they were ready to fight for her. The battle was fierce, but the resistance had the advantage of surprise. Lyra and Marcus led the charge, cutting through the enemy lines with precision and speed. The soldiers of the new regime fought back with all their might, but they weren't prepared for the strength and determination of the people Lyra had gathered. Lyra's heart pounded as she fought, her sword slicing through the air with deadly accuracy. She had never been trained to fight like this, but in the heat of battle, everything seemed to come naturally. Every swing of her blade, every step she took was driven by a single purpose: to reclaim her throne and restore her kingdom. As the battle raged on, Lyra found herself face to face with the leader of the new regime, the man who had orchestrated her family's downfall. His eyes were cold, calculating, and when he saw Lyra, a smirk crossed his face. "You think you can take back what's mine?" he sneered, his voice dripping with disdain. "You're nothing. You're just a lost little girl pretending to be a queen." Lyra's grip tightened on her sword. "I'm not a little girl anymore," she said, her voice steady. "And I'm not pretending. I'm the princess of this kingdom, and I will take back what is rightfully mine." With that, she charged at him, her sword clashing against his in a flurry of sparks. The battle between them was intense, each strike a testament to their hatred and the years of betrayal that had brought them to this moment. In the end, it was Lyra who emerged victorious. With a final, powerful blow, she knocked her opponent to the ground, his sword falling from his grasp. As he lay there defeated, Lyra stood over him, her chest heaving with exhaustion. "This is my kingdom," she said quietly, her voice full of authority. "And I'm taking it back." The battle was won, and with it, Lyra's kingdom was restored. The people celebrated, their voices ringing through the streets as they hailed her as their true queen. But as Lyra stood among them, she knew that the real work had just begun. She had reclaimed her throne, but now she had to rebuild. She had to bring her people together, heal the wounds of the past, and restore the kingdom to its former glory. And as she looked out over the crowd, with Marcus by her side, Lyra knew, one thing for certain, she was ready. The dust of battle had barely settled, and already the streets of the capital were alive with the sounds of celebration. The victory was hard-earned, and for many it felt like the weight of years had been lifted. Lyra, the once-lost princess, now stood at the forefront of her people, their queen, their beacon of hope. The palace, which had long been a symbol of ruin and decay, now stood proud once again, its walls echoing with the promises of a new era. Lyra stood on the steps of the palace, looking out at the crowd below. Her heart swelled with emotion as she took in the sight of the people who had fought for her, the ones who had believed in her when she could barely believe in herself. The streets were filled with banners and cheers, a clear sign that the kingdom had found hope once more. She was no longer the girl who scavenged in the ruins. She was no longer a broken child. She was their queen. Beside her stood Marcus, his gaze scanning the crowd with quiet pride. He had been with her every step of the way, through the doubts, the fears, and the battles. And now here they were, on the cusp of something great. She had done it. She had brought them back from the brink of destruction, and together, they would build something better. "You did it," Marcus said, his voice soft, though filled with awe. "You really did it." Lyra turned to him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "We did it," she corrected gently. "I couldn't have done it without you." Marcus smiled, his expression warm. "I was just a part of it. You were always meant to lead." Lyra's heart fluttered at his words, though a part of her still couldn't quite believe them. She had spent so long questioning whether she was truly capable of leading. But now, standing here, with her people looking to her for guidance, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she was the leader she had always needed to be, and it felt right. The next few days were filled with meetings, discussions, and planning. The palace that had once been a symbol of tyranny was now a place of hope, and it was where the future of the kingdom would be shaped. Lyra worked tirelessly, meeting with the leaders of the resistance, with advisors, and with the people who had once served her parents. They all had a role to play in rebuilding the kingdom, but Lyra knew that this wasn't something that could be done overnight. She had learned, during the battle and in the days since, that leadership wasn't just about making decisions, it was about listening. It was about understanding the needs of the people and working together to create something stronger. The old kingdom was gone, and with it, many of the old ways.